The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor made Sarah's hands tremble as she clutched the consent forms against her chest. At 23, she had imagined her life unfolding differently, not sitting alone in a sterile waiting room, facing a gynecological surgery that would drain her family's already depleted savings. Her mother had taken a second job at the diner downtown, working double shifts until her feet swelled. Her father had sold his beloved vintage truck, the one possession that brought him joy after 30 years working at the factory. And here she was, their only daughter, the source of their newest burden, too shy to even make eye contact with the nurses who called her name. Sarah had always been the quiet one. In high school, she'd eaten lunch in the library. In college, she'd chosen the back row of every lecture hall. Even now, approaching the registration desk felt like climbing a mountain. Each step weighted with the fear of being seen, of being judged, of being too much trouble for anyone. The pain that had started 6 months ago had become unbearable. But she'd waited, hoping it would disappear on its own because hoping was free, and doctors were not. Sarah Mitchell? A kind-faced nurse with graying hair appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Chen will see you now." The name meant nothing to her. She'd been assigned to him through the hospital's financial assistance program after 3 other practices had turned her away. "Charity case, that's what the receptionist at the last clinic had muttered under her breath. Not quite quietly enough. Sarah had left that office with burning cheeks and a shame so deep it had taken her 2 weeks to try again. Dr. Chen's office was different from what she'd expected. Instead of the cold clinical spaces she'd encountered before, this room had warm lighting and a small plant on the windowsill. Framed photographs lined one wall, not of medical achievements or degrees, but of smiling children in what looked like rural villages overseas. "Ms. Mitchell, please, have a seat." The voice belonged to a man who couldn't have been more than 35, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit beneath his white coat. Dr. James. Chen had the kind of presence that filled a room, confident but not arrogant, professional yet somehow approachable. His eyes, dark and intelligent, scanned her file before lifting to meet hers with unexpected gentleness. I know I'm here on the assistance program," Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise I'll pay back whatever I can. My family, we're trying—" "Ms. Mitchell," he interrupted softly, "let's focus on your health first. Money is a construct. Your well-being isn't." She blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. In her experience, everything came down to money, especially in hospitals. Over the next 30 minutes, Dr. Chen explained her condition with a patience she'd never encountered in a medical setting. He drew diagrams, answered her halting questions without a trace of condescension, and never once made her feel foolish for not understanding medical terminology. When she apologized for taking up too much of his time, he simply smiled. "I became a doctor to help people, not to watch the clock," he said. "You deserve to understand what's happening to your body." The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Sarah spent those 7 days in a fog of anxiety. But whenever doubt crept in, she remembered Dr. Chen's calm assurance. "You're in good hands. I promise." What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was the conversation taking place in the hospital's administrative office the day after her appointment. "Dr. Chen, this is highly irregular," the hospital administrator said, adjusting his glasses. "You're offering to cover her entire surgical costs? That's nearly $40,000. "I'm aware of the amount," James replied evenly. "But she's not the only patient in financial distress. If we make exceptions, then make them. I'll establish a fund for her and for others like her." He leaned forward, his voice carrying a steel that his gentle bedside manner had concealed. "My grandfather died because he couldn't afford the medication he needed. I won't let that happen to anyone under my care." The administrator fell silent. Everyone at Memorial Hospital knew Dr. Chen's story, though he rarely spoke of it himself. The son of immigrants who'd built a tech startup in his 20s and sold it for $200 million before attending medical school, a decision that had baffled the business world but made perfect sense to those who knew him. He could have retired at 30, but instead, he'd chosen the grueling path of surgical residency, specializing in gynecology because, as he'd once told a colleague, women's health is chronically underfunded and undervalued. "That needs to change," I'll process the paperwork, the administrator finally said. Sarah learned none of this. On the morning of her surgery, her mother held her hand in the pre-op room, trying not to cry. We'll get through this, baby. Your father picked up extra hours and Mrs. Mitchell. A financial counselor appeared at the curtain. I need to discuss the billing with you. Sarah's mother stood, bracing herself for the conversation she'd been dreading. There's been a development, the counselor continued, consulting her tablet. It appears an anonymous benefactor has established a medical fund, and your daughter's surgery has been fully covered. You owe nothing. The room went silent except for the steady beep of the blood pressure monitor. That can't be right, Sarah's mother whispered. There must be a mistake. No mistake. The fund specifically covers patients in financial hardship. You qualify, and all expenses have been resolved. Sarah's mother sank back into the chair, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, already groggy from the pre-surgery medication, squeezed her mother's hand, unable to fully process what she'd just heard. The surgery lasted 3 hours. Dr. Chen's hands moved with practiced precision, his team working in synchronized harmony around him. A lesser surgeon might have taken shortcuts, rushed through a charity case to get to more profitable procedures. But James Chen treated every patient as if they were the only one that mattered. When he finally stepped back, satisfied with his work, he thought not of the money he'd spent, but of his grandfather, who died too young, and of the promise he'd made at that grave, to use his privilege to protect others. Recovery was harder than Sarah had anticipated. The pain was manageable, but the vulnerability of it all, being seen in her most fragile state, made her want to disappear into the hospital sheets. Yet every time Dr. Chen came to check on her progress, his presence somehow made the world feel less overwhelming. You're healing beautifully, he said on the 3rd day, reviewing her chart. Another few days and you can go home. Dr. Chen, Sarah started, finally finding the courage to address what had been weighing on her mind. The financial counselor said there was a fund. Do you know who? I want to thank them. He was quiet for a moment, and something flickered across his face. Not discomfort exactly, but a careful consideration of how to respond. Whoever it was, he said finally, I'm certain they don't want thanks. They just wanted you to get well. Sarah studied his face, and in that moment, some instinct she couldn't name made the connection. The way he'd never mentioned money, the photographs of charitable work in his office, the quiet authority with which he moved through the hospital. This wasn't just a doctor doing his job. It was you, she said softly. He didn't confirm or deny it, but his eyes told her everything. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. You don't even know me. James Chen pulled up a chair, sitting at her eye level, a gesture that felt more significant than it should have. My grandfather was a proud man, he began. When he got sick, he refused to ask for help. He rationed his insulin, skipped doses to make it last longer. By the time my family realized how bad things were, it was too late. He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. I was 16 and I made him a promise at his funeral. If I ever had the means, I would make sure no one else had to choose between their health and their dignity. But $40,000 is less than I spend on my car, he said simply. Ms. Mitchell, I was lucky. I had an idea at the right time, met the right people, and suddenly had more money than one person could reasonably need. What's the point of wealth if it just sits in an account while people suffer? Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. In a world that had taught her she was a burden, here was someone who saw her humanity as reason enough. I don't know how to repay you, she said. Then don't. Just pay it forward someday in whatever way you can. Kindness doesn't need to be expensive. Sometimes it's just seeing someone, really seeing them, and deciding they matter. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the hospital lobby, no longer a patient but a volunteer. She'd started slowly, just a few hours a week, helping in the waiting room where she'd once sat terrified and alone. She learned to recognize the fear in other patients' eyes, the same fear she'd carried, and she'd sit with them, hold their hands, tell them they weren't alone. Dr. Chen sometimes passed through the lobby between surgeries. They'd exchange nods, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. He'd given her more than medical care. He'd given her a vision of what compassion looked like in action. and she was determined to carry that forward. One afternoon, helping an elderly woman with her paperwork, Sarah overheard two nurses talking. "Did you hear? Dr. Chen's expanding the medical fund. It'll cover 50 patients a year now. He's one of the good ones," the other nurse replied. "Doesn't do it for recognition either. Had to practically force him to accept that humanitarian award last month." Sarah smiled to herself, thinking of the quiet young millionaire who operated on charity cases with the same meticulous care he'd give anyone, who saw wealth not as an achievement but as a responsibility, who proved that humanity's greatest power wasn't in buildings or monuments but in simple acts of seeing each other's dignity and choosing every day to honor it. She was no longer the shy girl who couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She was someone who'd been seen, truly seen, and that changed everything.